So welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining our side event today on unlocking access to greater cooling efficiency and next generation refrigerants in Southeast Asia with a very long subtitle. Should I read it? Okay, so findings of a new CLASP study on dumping of inefficient room air conditioners in Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. So I'm Gabrielle Dreyfus. I'm the Chief Scientist for IGSD, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome today Ms. Jillian Webster, who's an Associate for Climate at CLASP, who will be giving the presentation. But given the scheduling of some other discussions tonight, we're going to mix up the order and actually open with remarks from two of our panelists to provide context and essentially make the geographical linkage on the fact that the issue of dumping of unwanted inefficient equipment is a larger global problem than some people might believe. And so with that, I will like to invite Mr. Kofi Agyarko, the Director of the Renewable Energy, Energy Efficiency, and Climate Change of the Energy Commission in Ghana to provide some remarks, followed by Mr. Emmanuel Osoe Quenta, who's the head of the National Ozone Unit in Ghana, will follow. Please.
Go ahead.
Oh.
Good. Good evening. I'm glad to be here, and I'm very thrilled to be privy to this kind of study that has just been completed. It is going to be a game changer amongst those of us who have put on our gloves to fight this dumping menace. I thought it was an African problem, but this very study has indicated that it goes beyond Africa. And for that matter, there is the need for all of us to join hands and fight against this obnoxious trade practice. Talking about dumping, more often than not, people think that if you talk about dumping, you're talking about used equipment, but that is not the case. Dumping could be used, and it could also be new, but substandard. What is interesting here is that those equipment do not meet the standards of the countries of origin, so they cannot be sold in those countries. However, they find it convenient to ship it to other countries for money. And jurisdictions that are attractive to dumping are jurisdictions that have no laws at all, environmental laws, and those that even if they have the laws, they don't have the robust enforcement mechanisms in place. And it opens that jurisdiction for those equipment which are substandards to be dumped on them. I came across an information which I want to share here. Very interesting. I know of a major producing and exporting country of cooling appliance. And I took my time to study their standardization laws. And in that standardization law, there is a provision that nobody can produce, sell, or dispose of an equipment that is cooling equipment that does not meet the minimum energy efficiency standard of that particular country. Interestingly, the next provision is that the first provision notwithstanding, the manufacturer can agree with the buyer on the technical specification. What is it trying to say here? It means that that same law that is supposed to ensure that quality standardized products are made is again making provision opening a door, a window of opportunity for that same country to push substandard equipment to countries that do not have standards. It means that if a buyer is coming from a country with no standards, he can agree on anything at all with the manufacturer, and the manufacturer will go ahead, produce those kind of equipment that are substandards, and ship to the buying country. So the issue of dumping must be a matter of concern to all and sundry, both exporters and importers. And this is where the concept of shared responsibility is introduced. In as much as we live in a global community where we have all charged ourselves to ensure that we live in a clean environment, to ensure that we protect ourselves from the depleting ozone layer, then it must be a concerted effort from all and sundry that we make sure we be each other's keeper. We don't have to take advantage of weaker nations and push onto them things that are not acceptable in the countries of origin. And I want to conclude by the words of the UN Secretary General. He says that if we are waiting for one country to take the lead before we act, eventually humanity will come last. I think this is a profound statement that should guide all of us who are interested in saving the Mother Earth, because this earth is on loan to us. It belongs to the next generation. We are just holding it in trust, so that if we cannot add anything to it, we need to make sure that we leave it the way we met it. We don't have to actually spoil it for the next generation. That will be my take on it for now. Thank you very much.
Eloquent and inspiring as always, Kofi. Thank you. Emmanuel?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm speaking on what Ghana has done to meet her HCFC phase out and how prevalent the sectors are in the use of R22. To start with, we embarked on the establishment of a regulatory framework where policies were developed, and we ensured that licensing should be very key. I'm referring to the importation of refrigerants itself. We made it a strict order to ensure that no single refrigerant would come into the country without being covered with a license. So we registered all importers. We subjected them to conditions that they should meet when they are importing refrigerants. And when we realized that we have targets to meet, we introduced quotas. And these quotas were made such that no single person can transfer his quota to another person. So we followed the Montreal Protocol reduction scenario. After the quotas have been allocated to these importers, we reduce them by the same margin in tandem with the Montreal Protocol reduction scenario. What we also do to avoid mislabeling of refrigerants is we go to the ports together with the customs, analyze these refrigerants before they are released onto the market. Previously, when we were encountering the situation where we were having mislabeled refrigerants, adulterated refrigerants, we advocated for the branding of the refrigerants. And thankfully, over 90% of all importers have now branded their refrigerants. So when you go to the market, you know which refrigerant is coming from which importer. And in that regard, they ensured that they wouldn't compromise on quality at the source where they do the importation. because your name would go after you and you'll be isolated. So this is one key thing that we did. Again, we trained the technicians in good practices. Once we decided that we will move away from these old ESs and move towards natural refrigerants, we sent 6 very good technicians to Studio Galileo in Italy, where they were trained in how to convert fairly new R22-based units to run on hydrocarbon R290. And when they came back, they also trained their peers. And at the time, to date, we have already converted well over 10,000 units of previously R22-based units to run on hydrocarbon. And to date, there hadn't been any unpleasant event. Having said that, we also decided if we want to suppress the volume of R22 that come into the country, then we need to also regulate the units that depend on them. Per the Montreal Protocol provisions, we would have only been able to ban R22-based units only at the end of the phase-out period. But then with that close collaboration with Energy Commission, which also has that power to regulate these kind of equipment, we decided to enlist all the importers of air conditioners, and we issued them with quotas. We didn't want it to be such that one entity would have high volumes to import. So we brought everybody together, and based on their historical importation volumes, we allocated these quotas to them. That is specifically HCFC-based air conditioners quotas. It is interesting because of the numbers. Each person may have, say, 20, 25 units to import in a year, and they found it not to be attractive. So since January to date, no single R22-based air conditioners have entered the country. That is one good thing, to suppress the importation of R22-based air conditioners. We have also embarked on public awareness to let them know that R22 is going to undergo continued restricted supply. So there was the need to adjust to other alternatives. Together with other implementing agencies, having determined that we are moving towards natural refrigerants, we have already imported over 1,000 units of R290-based air conditioners into the country. Those who patronized these units are still asking for more. Unfortunately, we have run out of them, and the market is such that the suppliers want to ensure that there are some standards before they would serve you with these air conditioners. So we have engaged 2 major importing companies to deal with these suppliers, original equipment manufacturers. And they are at the terminal stage of finalizing their agreements so that there would be a shift from the usual HFC-based to R290. And to walk the talk, the Environmental Protection Agency has a training school. So under our HPMP Stage 2, we have also imported 100 pieces of R290 air conditioners. We have carried out an environmental audit of a particular block. So we are going to uninstall all the 22 and HFC-based air conditioners, install these hydrocarbon-based air conditioners, thereafter carry out another energy audit to demonstrate the efficiency of the R290 units so that we would blow it out through the media for people to know that, yes, indeed, there are benefits if you patronize the use of R290-based units. We have also carried out recovery recycling activities in the country. Having trained the technicians, we have walked them through the need to recover and recycle. And we have established 4 refrigeration training centers of excellence all through the country. 1 in the southern sector, 1 in the middle sector, 1 in the northern sector, and 1 in the Greater Accra region itself, where technicians come in to be trained and to patronize the use of the equipment that we have installed in these centers. Predominantly, like I mentioned, R22-based units they dominate the unitary air conditioning industry. But then, like I mentioned, we have developed a national cooling plan and identified what the various user sectors are going to use so that we move away from the use of R22. And for HFCs as well, we have developed a national cooling plan, like I mentioned, and we have identified what we're going to use in the commercial sector, domestic sector, industrial sector, and the mobile air conditioning sector is currently being studied because we are not sure of what options that we can employ because HFCs are still the dominant refrigerants that are available. It's only recently that very modern cars use HFOs, but with the type of refrigerants they use, which are quite expensive, we cannot vouch to subject the practitioners to move along that tangent. We're hoping that with time, with R&D still continuing, we believe other options could be identified so we can be sure of what would be used in the mobile air conditioning sector. Thank you, Gabriel.
Thank you for examples of how to bring the alternative technologies to the market. Now, I think just to close in 5 minutes before you guys have to go, Kofi, that is in parallel with efforts that you're making to keep the things that you don't want. And I hear that there's the cooling plan and other efforts to keep the things that you don't want, which is part of the issue of dumping out of the market. Kofi, could you speak a little bit to that?
Good. Thank you very much. It's interesting that we are friends and we happen also to be working from both ends to ensure that we stem this tide of dumping. Ghana has had its fair share of dumping prior to 2005 when we launched the national standards and labeling regime. Appliance market in Ghana tilted 80% towards the used obsolete market. Everywhere that you pass in Ghana, you will find these junks displayed for sale. And that brought about transformer overloads with its attendant blackouts and brownouts. Ghana has a history of cheap hydropower. But after 1996, the hydropower could not support our economic growth because of the influx of these junks, the zombies, the energy guzzlers. So we quickly conducted a study in 2003, and we found out that a whopping 30% of the total power generated went waste on these junks. So immediately, we decided to turn things around to introduce MEPS. So the MEPS was introduced in 2005. And after the introduction of MEPS, in fact, we first settled on 3: air conditioners, refrigerators, and lighting. So after 2005, in 2008, we decided that to make the MEPS meaningful, there was the need for us to stop the importation of these used appliances. So a law to that effect was passed, and it kicked in 2013. And I want to tell you that between 2013 till date, every year we save 500 gigawatt hours. So you can multiply it and see the amount of energy that we have saved so far. Additionally, now we have been able to attract companies that are prepared to sell new, efficient, and some are even doing super efficient appliances. And yesterday I was telling Emmanuel that those who are doing super efficient appliances, they have run out of stock, whereas the ordinary appliances, although they are standard, they are still in the showrooms. The movement is not as fast as the super efficient appliances. So we have succeeded in stemming the tide of rapid expansion of generation capacity, because hitherto there was always the need to find money to expand generation capacity to be able to meet the ever-growing demand because of the use of the junks. And in democracy, where a government is afraid of people, anytime there is tariff adjustment, people jump onto the street and make noise, and government comes in with subsidy. And you know, subsidies are eventually paid by the same people. So it created some form of economic problems for us. But one sad thing is that this junks has earned Ghana a very bad name as the world most toxic sport. We have a sport in Accra where it is acclaimed the world most toxic sport. Why? Because these junks that have outlived their useful lifespan in Europe and elsewhere are brought in, and they find resting place in that particular spot, where they are bent, where they are broken, where they are salvaged for the plastics to be used, and the rest are dumped there. And that has created a very serious situation for us. But now things have changed. With the introduction of the MEPS, things have changed. We have spent time to recruit and train enforcement officers who are stationed at the ports of entry. And we make sure that either new or old appliance, you meet the, the new ones must meet the minimum energy standards. The old ones don't come in at all. And this we have done since 2013, and we continue to do it. And the benefits have started coming in to the admiration of even the politicians, who sometimes tend to be stumbling blocks on our way. We have managed to show them that indeed it is a good thing to do. So the solution to this dumping menace, I think that in the first place, there should be local laws. You need to have the local regulations. That is the first point of call. The second one, which is most difficult, is to get the exporting countries to appreciate and to respect the local laws that you have put in place. And that is where the shared responsibility issues come in. If they agree that indeed you are doing so much to clean your environment, so they will not come and dump these things on you, then it gives you a very good cause to move forward. Let me quickly import something here. Yesterday, at the plenary, the EU delegates tried to cast a shadow of doubt on the fact that EU has outlawed control gases, so under no circumstance would they ship apply equipment with R12 to Africa. That is a palpable lie. I'm sorry, today we're going to have another program. Otherwise, I was going to show you a matrix, a spreadsheet, country upon country from 2020 to 2022, countries that have shipped refrigerators that are laden with R12. You understand? So these things are going on. It is up to our counterparts to respect us, at least give us a modicum of respect, that if it is not good for us, then it is not good for them, so that they stop it. But so long as they decide not to give us that respect, I think that we have a daunting task to do. Let me use this opportunity to say that our naming and shaming has also yielded results. Now, Italy has overtaken UK. UK is no longer the bad boy. Italy has become the bad boy. So I think that we'll keep on doing the naming and shaming to ensure that at least our voice will be heard across the Mediterranean to Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel Kofi. I think I know that you have a consultation to get to.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of people are here for the new data that we will be presenting momentarily, but I did want to pick up on something that you both said. I think the focus today is on this idea of the substandard new technology, and something that you said that I think both of you hit on is, and that on the TEEP Energy Efficiency Task Force, which Harlan and I both served on, we were asked multiple times, what are the barriers to access to the low GWP alternatives, high efficiency equipment? And I think what you've just heard are some of the barriers that exist, which is markets that are flooded with substandard units that are often not, would be illegal to sell on the domestic markets of the countries of exports. So I do want to separate this, some of the issues between, and I think Kofi actually eloquently tied them together, that there's the used products are part of the problem, but even if you ban the used products, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be getting the highest efficiency low GWP, that there are additional measures that need to be put into place, and including the participation of the exporting countries and recognizing and enabling those markets to not be flooded with the substandard units.
Perfect.
Thank you very much. So thank you again. I know you and I think with that, I'll let you depart to your meetings.
Yes.
Thank you.
And then I will tee up for the presentation. Well, Jillian, do you want to get yourself set up?
Sure, yeah, I think I'm ready to
Good.
go.
Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
the opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can
Thank you.
probably
Always a pleasure.
see, and then, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kofi.
Hi everyone. Whoa, a little loud. Hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Kofi, Emmanuel, thank you so much for those powerful words. My name is Jillian Weber. I am a research associate with CLASP. We did the 2020 study in conjunction with IGSD, the Institute for Governance and Sustainable Development. And now we have done a new study this year, 2023, focusing on the Southeast Asia region. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'm a co-author of that study, and I leaded on the data of that study. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. At the end, we'll have a Q&A session. So to reiterate, the dumping scope, particularly for this study, is of new products. It's not of waste. And IGSD has provided the following definition for environmental dumping of air conditioners, which includes export of technology that cannot legally be sold in the country of export due to failure to meet environmental safety standards, efficiency, or other product standards, and export of technology unsuitable for the country of export because refrigerants are no longer available due to the Montreal Protocol. And so to sum up what we found in the 2020 study in the Africa region, basically we found that low efficiency, high GWP refrigerants were coming primarily from imports as well as joint ventures between large multinational companies and local African companies. And additionally, across Africa, there is a lack of policies, so including efficiency standards, but also proactive anti-dumping policies that prevented the dumping from happening across the region. And so for the 2023 study, we wanted to look at the extent and sources of environmental dumping in the Southeast Asia region. And so specifically, the region, we looked at 6 countries, so the largest economies: Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. That accounts for 90% of the rack market in the Southeast Asia market. And then in terms of the scope of products, for each country we looked at single splits, and then for Philippines we also did window units because that has a significant market in the Philippines. And these were chosen because they are the most popular cooling products. And so just a quick overview of the methodology, approach, data sources. So we did data collection and desk research, interviews with local stakeholders in 5 of the countries, lots of data analysis, and then we also modeled stock and emissions under 4 policy scenarios using CLASP's MEPSI tool. And the primary data sources included BISRIA, market research firm. We got market and model level data from BISRIA, as well as the UN Comtrade database. We got import and export data. Additional data sources included countries' product registration systems, manufacturer product catalogs for model level data, as well as Euromonitor or JRAIA, the Japanese Refrigeration and Air Conditioning Industry Association, as well as previous CLASP studies where we did some extensive research in specific countries. And so to look at the region as a whole, across the 6 specific countries, in 2021, the rack market was 8.3 million units. Singapore and Malaysia have the highest rack penetration, where Indonesia and the Philippines have the lowest. And as we see from the projected data, we do see penetration and the rack market are projected to grow in the coming years. Thailand and Malaysia have very large rack manufacturing bases at 9 million and 3 million respectively for both domestic and exports. And then rack production in Indonesia, Vietnam, and Philippines is mostly actually for the domestic market, not for export. And then all countries import racks to help with the AC demand. And so if we look a little bit more specifically at the trade flows, the left-hand figure is the 2021 trade flows. So as you can see, China imported to every single country in 2021 and had about 4 million, little under 4 million exports to the region. And then Thailand exported within the region about 3 million units, and Malaysia a little bit over 1 million, with the other countries primarily importing. Interestingly, China was not always as big of a player. So if we look back, if we look on the right-hand graph, in 2012, China's market share of exports to the region is about 25%. Flash forward a decade, it's about 45%. Thailand and Malaysia, again, very high, starts to trickle down over a decade. And there are kind of a myriad of reasons that contributed to this, but one includes the ASEAN-China Free Trade Agreement. So Thailand and Philippines both went from high tariffs on imported goods from China down to both 5 in 2018. And so now I'm going to outline the study findings as they pertain to low efficiency racks. And so this figure, basically the x-axis is a given country's market size out of the 6, so out of the total amassed market. And then the y-axis is for any given country, a given brand's share within that market. And so as you can see, Indonesia and Vietnam have quite large markets. They each have about, had about 2 million units in 2021. Malaysia, Thailand, and the Philippines had about 1 million each. And Singapore, a very small market, had about 50,000. And so across all of the markets, we can see this darker blue color. That's actually Japanese brands. So Japanese brands were very prominent. They actually made up 47% of the entire market share. And the most popular were from Japan, South Korea, China, and the US. So orange is South Korea, purple is China, and red is US. So the vast, vast majority of the market were large multinational brands from those 4 countries. And across the markets, the most popular brands were Daikin, Panasonic, and LG. So Japan, South Korea. And so the left-hand graph, this, I guess I should say, this slide is, we're going to talk about the characteristics of the market. And so the left-hand graph is showing inverter rack penetration. So inverter being tends to be a higher efficiency technology. And so gray is 2021 data, with green being predictive 2026 data. And as you can see, more than half of the countries had relatively low inverter penetration in 2021, but all markets are predicted to increase their inverter penetration into 2026. And as you can see, from 4.8 to 3.5, the median efficiencies do vary quite a bit between compressor types. And in general, throughout the study, the majority of racks are under 5 kilowatts. And then on this right-hand graph, we have MEPs for both the region. So the ASEAN region likes to harmonize MEPs or set targets for harmonization for the countries. And then we have individual countries' MEPs. And by MEPs, just minimum energy performance standard is what we mean by that. And so as you can see, this clump right here is most of the countries except the light blue is Singapore, which was included really as a benchmarking country because it has high efficiency policies and an overall high efficiency market. And so as you can see, a lot of the MEPs are quite low, right around the regional 2020 target. Not really near the regional 2023 and not even close to the regional 2025 target or the China MEPs. So we're seeing a lot of room for opportunity for MEPs improvement in the region. And so specifically when we say low efficiency, in the study what we're talking about is units that do not meet China's inverter MEPs. And that's about 6.1 CSPF for units that are 4.5 kilowatts and below. And the reason that we chose China MEPs as the threshold is for two reasons. One, it harmonizes with both the ASEAN 2025 target level as well as the U4E industry model guidelines. So it's creating this consensus of a level of efficiency that markets really should be getting to. And then also China's export presence globally as well as specifically within the region. And so overall, as you can see, from all the way from Philippines, Window, and Indonesia up through Singapore, there's a really significant range of efficiencies across the 6 markets. The overall sales-weighted median efficiency was 4.2 CSPF, so a solid just about a solid 2 CSPF below that target China level. And many locally produced racks are at or below the ASEAN 2023 MEPs. Interestingly, these locally produced units are from large multinational companies that are not based in the region. And so if we look a little bit more specifically at China's rack market, its transformation, and also its exports, we can see that China has the largest rack market, so it has 85 million in 2021, which is half of the world's rack demand. And then in 2020, as I just mentioned in the previous slide, it adopted these world-leading rack MEPs at that 6.1 level. And that had a really profound effect on China's market. So China had a domestic market that was about 50% inverter and about 50% R22, and then to present day, almost 100% R22 and inverter units. And additionally, the grade 1 China MEPs, or excuse me, the grade 1 racks from China increased in penetration a lot after the adoption of those world-leading MEPs. And so this is interesting because on the top bar of this graph, we have China's 2021 domestic market. And then if we look a little bit more specifically at China's exports, so these bottom three bars, we can see that they actually don't align with China's domestic market. So this lower than grade 5, quite low quite low efficiency units are an enormous proportion of their export market for 2019, 2020, and 2021, and a fraction of their domestic market in 2021. And we're also seeing less of the grade 1 and much more in the domestic market. On average, the efficiency of Chinese rack exports was lower than those sold. Specifically, 37% of exported racks were below China's MEPS in 2021. And so this graph is showing the total market, including the grayed out bars. So you can see how much of the colored, which is the low efficiency, for each country, how much low efficiency units are in proportion to its total market. So across the region, there was an estimated 6.2 million low efficiency racks sold in 2021. That's 74% of total sales were considered low efficiency across the region. 71% of these low efficiency sales were actually manufactured in the region. So that's different than the Africa findings, where a lot of it was imported. And we do still consider this dumping. So even though they're produced in the region, as you saw on that graph that I showed earlier, most of the market is occupied by large multinational brands that are not based in the region. And so we consider that dumping because it's an export of technology. It's an export of research and development. These companies that have presences in their own domestic markets and other markets have the capability to produce much more efficient units. But they're choosing for these markets to produce much lower efficiency units. And so 29% of the low efficiency racks were imported from outside the region. Vietnam and Singapore imported the most, and primarily those were coming from China. And so this graph just gives a little bit more context to what we just saw. So it actually shows the entire market, and that 74% of low efficiency racks is the colored portion. That as I discussed, the majority of it, 71% of the low efficiency, is produced in Southeast Asia, with 29% produced outside. We wanted to mention that across the 6 countries, all 27 brands that we identified sold low efficiency racks. So every brand is responsible in this instance. And then most are produced by local subsidiaries, so there's no involvement of a local company. It's just subsidiaries of multinational brands. So that's 65% of the 71 that's produced in the region, so the vast majority. 18% are joint ventures between large multinational brands and smaller local brands, and just 17% of that 71% is solely local brands that are producing inefficient racks. So as you can see, it's dumping. I mean, it's clear as day. These multinational brands that have the capability are producing low efficiency racks in the region, or alternatively are exporting into the region with 29%. And again, like I said, primarily from China, about 83%, and that's actually mainly because China just has a lot of rack production, but as we saw on the other slide, it's not necessarily Chinese brands. It's brands based in different countries. And so this is a similar graph to the one we saw earlier, with the imports grayed out. So we're just looking at local manufacturing, and we're seeing the exact same picture. It's Japanese brands, South Korean brands, Chinese, United States brands taking over the vast majority. Again, all multinational brands that we're seeing and doing local production, except a little bit in the Philippines, where those royal blue are local brands, and they do occupy a significant chunk of the market. In terms of compressor manufacturing, it's a very similar story. Most of it comes from China, and also a little bit of manufacturing within the region happens in Thailand and Malaysia. And so we wanted to look at efficiencies of units that are exported compared to the MEPs in that exporting country. And so the left, or I guess the only graph on the screen, is China's rack exports. So we're just specifically looking at China. And again, the different brands, so Chinese brands are definitely not the whole story here. It's many countries are in this shared responsibility. 93% of exports from China do not meet Chinese MEPs. That's a staggering figure. 93% do not meet Chinese MEPs. Alternatively, if we look at South Korea, it's a very similar picture. About 60% of exported racks don't meet South Korean MEPs. And we have the major takeaway: exporting countries have pro-dumping policies, as domestic rack MEPs do not apply for exports, allowing export of products that cannot be sold domestically. That is the underscore of dumping. We also wanted to look at the 3 most popular brands. We found that they offer mostly inefficient units. So reading this graphic, the columns go from least efficient at 4 CSPF, 5, 6, we're getting into the higher efficiency. And so these are just the levels of efficiency, and the color indicates how widely available they are. So overall, we took the 3 most popular brands across the regions. The low 4 efficiency, pretty widely available. The 7 is barely available. And also, it's pretty interesting. You can see, for instance, with Panasonic, they have a lot more high efficiency available in Singapore compared to like Indonesia, and that's just within the same brand. So across markets, we can see that Panasonic has the ability to produce more efficient racks, and they just choose not to for Indonesia. It's not necessarily just these 3. We assume that it's a similar picture for all of the brands, but we took these as the example. We also wanted to look into the climate commitments of the different brands. And so except for Gree, which has some climate commitments but not necessarily carbon neutrality, all of the brands are committed to carbon neutrality by different years. And we looked at their reports, and actually low efficiency units turning into high efficiency sales, taking high GWP refrigerants, making a transition to low GWP refrigerants. That was all mentioned in a lot of these. But interestingly, present day, we're not seeing that commitment happening in real time. And so I just want to talk a little bit about the refrigerant transition within the region. And so first we can start with R22. So it's really a great picture, actually. R22 is essentially phased out within the region. So that is a different picture than what we saw in Africa, where there was a lot of R22. There are a very few, select few units that have R22 that are sold. They're mostly residual stock that had been previously manufactured, but just not sold. And the main factors for this refrigerant transition included MLF support. So in Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam, numerous enterprises were able to transition with MLF support. Also, bans on the manufacture and import of R22 in several countries had a big impact, as well as the coinciding of China's MEPs, which, like I said, had a big transition for China to go to R32. That had an impact in the region as well through their exports. And if we look at HFCs and the phase down, the region is actually doing really well. R32 is red, and as you can see, there's a lot of red for each country. It's 2021 data, projected 2026 data. So all countries are moving to R32, and as of 2021, most of them had pretty large shares of R32. However, that being said, the blue is R410A, so there still is 35% of R410A in the region, and except for Singapore, every single R410A unit is inefficient. So that is still, a presence in the market. And the refrigerant transition in China is, as I mentioned before, helping the transition to R32. And so, oh no. And so in the impact analysis, we wanted to basically look at the low efficiency units, what is their climate impact and what would happen if we replace those with high efficiency units and low GWP refrigerants. And so what we chose for some of the policy scenarios was China MEPS, as I explained previously why we chose that. And then for the refrigerant regulations, we looked to the U4E model guidelines, which has an upper limit of 750 GWP and obviously no ozone depleting potential. So that's kind of where we drew some of the policy scenarios from. And so we ran 4 scenarios. First is the base case, so it's just taking present data, using the projected growth to extrapolate to future years. The first policy scenario is just adopting China MEPS in 2025, nothing else, no refrigerant regulation. The second scenario is adopting China MEPS in 2025, and then also those U4E regulations that we just saw in the previous slide in 2025. And then the third scenario is doing both of those, but then also adopting a near zero. We used R290 as the equivalent, but ideally something a little safer in 2025. And so the results can be seen in this slide. So the left-hand graph is both indirect and direct combined emissions annually, and we can see that the light blue is BAU, and every policy scenario does yield substantial reductions from the BAU, so that's great. There's a lot of potential in the region for reductions. The right-hand graph is looking at cumulative, so 2025 through 2050. We're looking at cumulative emissions, and then in the translucent area, the proportion of reductions from the BAU. And so policy scenario 1, 2, 3, the translucent blue is that MEPS, so the China MEPS doesn't change throughout, we're just adopting them in each scenario, and it's providing 20% reduction compared to the BAU, so that's really fantastic. Adopting China MEPS in the region would really have a substantial impact. Policy scenario 2, so adopting the 750 GWP limit for U4E, doesn't look like it's doing much, but that's actually really good for the region because they're already on their way to adopting mostly R32. And then in the policy scenario 3, adopting a near zero GWP refrigerant, it has very substantial impacts. 20% plus 12, 32, almost a third of reductions from BAU could be achieved cumulatively 2023 or 2025 through 2050. And if we total that, it's over a gigaton of reductions cumulatively. So that's really substantial. We did a quick life cycle cost analysis. So for most countries, it's as you'd expect, so from the BAU unit to the China MEPS unit, we're seeing that there is a reduction in the life cycle cost, even though the purchasing price of the unit is generally a little bit more. These are conservative estimates because in theory, when a market would transition, there wouldn't be such a premium on the China MEPS unit, but we did take present day prices. So these are conservative estimates, yet still yielding, almost $300 to $700 over the lifetime for the consumer. And so these are the recommendations that we wanted to take away from the study. Really wanted to underscore that environmental dumping is a shared responsibility. These actions to stop environmental, financial, and compliance burdens require collaboration from both importing and exporting countries. So for Southeast Asia policymakers in the top left, recommendations would be to adopt those China MEPS, that ASEAN 2025 level by 2025. As we saw, that would produce substantial reductions. Also adopting regulations that ban high GWP refrigerants, and also adopting preferential import policies and incentives for energy efficient ACs. For the private sector, as we looked at some of their climate commitments, we want to see accountability for those net zero commitments. We want to see transparency and regular updating. And they need to stop selling inefficient ACs in markets. They need to start selling the efficient ACs that we know that they can produce. For the policymakers in the export countries, we want to ensure that exports at least meet the exporting countries' domestic requirements. Again, you should not be able to export things that you cannot sell in your own country. And then in terms of the Montreal Protocol, as we saw within the region, some of the funding really helped the R32 transition. So we would just advocate that we should have more of that. That was obviously very successful. And we want enterprises to go to even lower GWP refrigerants. And that's basically it. That was really the takeaways from our study. Happy to answer any questions. I have like all the data, so if you're interested, wanted to talk about assumptions or anything like that, yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. And then up next we have a panel discussion, so Herlin will be leading that.
So thanks, Jillian. I think I invite you to sit down. I think what I was going to propose, did we have a question already? Or I was thinking maybe to ask, since I did not have a chance to introduce Ms. Herlianika, who is the president of the ASHRAE Indonesia chapter, to provide a few remarks, and then I was going to open it up for a panel discussion. Does that sound okay, Jillian?
Yeah,
Give you a chance to recover?
Great. Sure.
So over to you, Herlin, to talk about Indonesia experience.
Thank you, Gabby. It is a thrill for me to share my experience and also my limited knowledge about the energy efficiency labeling on split AC in the country, in Indonesia. Unfortunately, the labeling is not popular yet in the consumers. On CLASP and use survey, we found that only 5% of Indonesia split AC consumers knows about these labelings. So even though Indonesia already have this regulation since 2015, unfortunately the consumers doesn't know about these tools for them to protect them actually. Why is that happen in Indonesia? We found that you can also see from Jillian presentation on the slide 25, the electricity price in Indonesia is considered very low. It is only maybe less than 10 cents. Yeah, it is one of the reason the customer never consider about the electricity consumption as a consideration to invest a new split AC. And the next problem in Indonesia to have high energy efficient system is electricity voltage in Indonesia is not that stable. I heard from Daikin, maybe Daikin already put tools that to avoid this unstable voltage, but unfortunately the technician has no competency yet for the inverter. So sometimes they will do jumper the electricity connection. So the control is not work for the inverter. Yeah, that's what happened in Indonesia because even though the government has regulation for certification for the technician since 2019, so every technician should have a certificate, but yet it is only 20% of the whole the certificate. The technician in Indonesia had that certificate. So the rest of 80% doesn't have good education and also knowledge about split AC, how to install and how to maintenance the split AC. So when the consumer wants to shift to the inverter technology, they will always have problems with inverter. Only maybe less than 1 year, the system already broken. Yeah, that's what happened with inverter in Indonesia. That's why if you see from the study that Jillian has shown us today, it is only less than 15% in Indonesia, the inverter market share. Yeah, it is unfortunate situation in Indonesia. And some producers complain about incentive. Government have this regulation, but doesn't give this incentive to consumer. It is not that easy to give incentive to consumer because based on our research also, our previous study on the end user survey done by CLASP in Indonesia, the ownership of this split AC in Indonesia it only 5% of the population. So it is not easy for government to give incentive for the 5% consumers. Yeah. Compared to the population, so the user of split AC is not it's middle up person. It is not a group of person that have the right to get the subsidies from government. So if we talk about incentive from government, it is not easy to transform the market to inverter. And then the technician competencies, I already mentioned about this, and government always get complaint from the producers, of course, because producers said that Indonesia is have a wide economical elasticity of the end users. Yeah, they always say that this cooling system also the low economical community also have the right to get this split AC. So they have to sell a lower price. Yeah, that's always the reason from producer to push the government not to raise the maps. Yeah, and of course they always complain not only to the ministries. They sometimes go to the parliament. So it becomes complicated situation. Yeah, because I also involved with supporting Ministry of Energy to set this minimum energy performance. That's maybe the challenges in Indonesia to set the higher maps for this AC split.
Thank you, Harlan, for adding that useful nuance to this. You know, we want to paint and thank you to Jillian and CLASP for that data, for painting that picture. One data point that I'm eagerly awaiting to get back is whether, when China's MEPS went into effect, whether the average price for a level 3 inverter changed, whether it went down is my question. I don't know if there's anyone in the audience who has an answer to that question, but I think there's, we've discussed in the past the difference between cost and price, and I believe that there are some elements to that in this discussion as well, and how that their marketing strategies, as we saw. I'd like to open it up for questions. Does anyone have clarification questions, confusion? All right, I see one. Please go ahead. Does it work? It's not working? Can you? Yeah, there you go.
Hello. Yeah, so actually, I'm Sonal Kumar from CW India, and my question is to the presenter. So actually, I would like to understand that Yes, from the environment point of view, yeah, it is right that one should not be allowed to export those kind of system which cannot be sold in the same country. But the issue is also that those systems, there will be cost difference between the high efficient system and the low efficient system. And is there any analysis to see that what is that price differential, and also looking at the affordability of the people in these countries? Because if we push very high efficient, and if those are at higher cost, so basically my point is to also have those socioeconomic parameters also looked at, to look at affordability and also assuring access to cooling in these countries, because affordability from both point, like one is the initial cost and also the running cost. So are the electricity prices are so that it can make purchase decision more attractive, so purchasing the efficient AC is more attractive. So are these kind of analysis considering these socioeconomic factors of affordability and accessibility also included in this study? Thanks.
Okay, it's on. Yeah, that's a really good question. That was not the focus of the study. We really wanted to look at the trade flows, the climate impacts. So I think what we did for the cost analysis was looking at the life cycle cost. Again, a little bit limited because it was present day data. We thought about trying to model if the market started to shift, but there are just so many variables with that. I think it's kind of hard to accurately model an accurate picture of for each individual country, like if they started to shift, what the price difference would look like. That is one area of the study that I do think we could expand upon, though, is kind of the specific socioeconomic situation, the purchasing power. If the market started to shift, like what would that look like for the average consumer? And I know electricity price is really low in a lot of countries, so I think that there would kind of be an interesting analysis with the China MEPs. I do think purchasing price makes a big difference. Thank you for that comment. I think that's an area of the study that we could expand upon, and perhaps we could revise it and add that component. That was not originally part of the scope. We did a lot of trade research and refrigerant background research, focused more on that.
Did you want to say anything?
So thank you for the great job and presentation. Of course, my guy who talked before is reaching the point. We are bringing to the market what the market is affordable to pay. This is almost we are in Africa and what I just see in this area. I think there is another point I would suggest you to see also. Has the president of Australia in Indonesia just said, the issue is also on how leaders are seeing refrigeration sector, because the refrigeration sector has seen in those countries has a luxury. So they are overtaxing refrigeration equipment when they import, because mostly they get their income from importation or exportation for raw material. So has a refrigeration equipment is for very few people, I just said before, on 5% in Indonesia, and mostly in Africa, and more or less the same number of people. The government is getting more taxes on this equipment because only rich people can afford to buy refrigeration equipment, meaning that refrigeration equipment cannot reach the good quality product because quality has a price. I think this also, we think we need to know everyone, and we already know. Quality has a cost. And to bring quality product, I believe we want it to make it available for everyone. But we have to see on the other side what's happening, what bring all these multinationals to make this kind of business. Because the quality, even the electricity grid, is not, in some countries, in African countries, is not stable. If you would, inverter, as she already said, we have to change every day in a conditioner. These are all the matters bringing to this. So we have to mine is a suggestion. Also to see other side why they continue to export or to import, depending on where you stand, this kind of equipment. And I think we will see really how to do together to stop this, because at the end of the day, the businessman make profit, and he will do everything he can do to get profit. In this case, of course, we are talking in the small village where we are all living Cold War, but when people make business, they get their profit and don't care about the other things. We are talking about climate change, we are talking about future generation, even ours, but if we don't face the problem really in two different angles, we will continue to talk about dumping, but we will not be able to find the right solution good for everyone. This is my suggestion and comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that thoughtful comment. Again, I would say similarly to what I responded, that was outside of the scope of our study, but absolutely a really good point, and I appreciate hearing from the audience what you would like to have seen in the study as we plan to partner with IGSD and at least look into doing this study in another region. And there's always opportunities to update the study because that kind of data is valuable. So thank you so much for that input.
Let me add something just to give you an idea. I started to make such a study in Africa, and I had a feedback about more than 20 countries coming back to me to give a taxes on importation of refrigeration equipment. We have in some countries up to 111% when you import refrigeration equipment in a country. Meaning what? That refrigeration equipment will never be affordable for everyone. In continent as Africa, where we need refrigeration sector to preserve the food shelf, because we don't have a cold chain in Africa. In very few countries, in South Africa, in some northern countries, we have refrigeration equipment in cold chain. This is the reason why also the level, in the economical level, they are a little bit higher than sub-Saharan countries. But we need to let them know. Now we are talking about efficient air conditioning with R290. I'm very scared. Really, I'm scared about that. Not because I'm against that. I promote and we like to have sustainable world for future generation. But imagine we are bringing 219 air conditioning to a country where the technicians are not able to handle flammable refrigerant. They are not able to handle even R22 because they don't have the tools, the right tools to make their job. The tools in the market, the very few, are too expensive for them. We have a project where we train 20 people in the country where you have 3,000 technicians, self-made men, everyone able to fix a refrigerator or to fix air conditioner. They don't have any vacuum pump or any hose or any leak detector. They just have a cylinder. We go to buy the day before, and the house is to connect it. And now you are bringing to those guys the air conditioner, efficient air conditioner with flammable refrigerator. You know what? We are preparing the next terrorist, because every single technician where we will go, or explode himself, or we create the condition for the customer to explode. And this already happening in Africa. I have a picture of people we burn and fire, some case, unfortunately, death already happening in Africa, in Zimbabwe, in Zambia, in Burkina Faso, in Nigeria, in Niger. I have a picture of people burn, technicians. Also, some people are already dying. You know, doing what? Just recharging freezer with R600A. Imagine we got it in split air conditioner, where we don't have even the flaring tools to make flaring. That's me in no electronic scale to see how many grams we are filling in the system. So is realistically, we are going to from one side to extreme another one. We will prevent our environment, but we will kill all human beings. So we have to be careful, and we have to face really the situation of climate change, and in this case, to focus more on safety. I'm really scared about that, and we need to make action as soon as possible on this. This is just a common suggestion for all attendees. Those who are involved in this matter, we have to be careful and to find a solution as soon as possible before starting burning the world. Thank you.
All right, those are excellent points. I don't know, Helen, if you want to touch on any of those issues. I think that there are, as you say, multiple barriers to access to these technologies. This report is looking at the data in one set of them, but you've pointed out a number of others, including that luxury tax, which I don't know if that's something that we can look up in those countries to see if there's any type of tax like that. But I did want to ask Helen, with ASHRAE, in your perspective, you talked a little bit about the technician certification, and maybe on a positive note, what is working on the technician training side?
Yeah, right now Indonesia has more than 70,000 technicians. 70,000 technicians, and if some project mention that they already do something good in Indonesia, supporting the technician certification, it is as of today, maybe it is only 20% of these technicians. So we have a lot of technicians still that has no good knowledge about this energy efficiency. Actually, even though they still have they still do living from this refrigeration, but even though we sell the high-end product, the high-efficient product, but the energy efficiency will not be there with the wrong installation. It is our problem also in Indonesia. They don't know how to put the condenser. They don't know how to install the length of the pipe, the size of the pipe, and how to bend the pipe, and etc. Sometimes most of them in Indonesia doesn't have a vacuum pump, so they never vacuum the split AC. Can you imagine that? How long the system will be operate smoothly there? It is our problem, but I can understand now. It is. I cannot wait to see you CLASP to share this presentation actually in the country, in Indonesia, with the government, because we can see from another perspective. If a country wants to still stay in the low maps, then the country will get the consequences as the dumping ground. Yeah, and then if we see the consumers or the ownership of the split AC, it is only for middle up community. So then they will not think about the price if the market of the lower quality is not there. Actually, yeah, we don't need to provide low quality. Actually, if the government have confidence enough, yeah, that's what we have to make a noise, yeah, to advocate all the government that we have to hand in hand together to put higher maps. So every country that will export their low quality will not accept it everywhere. We have to do hand in hand. Yeah, not a country have lower maps. I'm scary with the grapes because today Indonesia is now become dumping already. If we saw from your graph, yeah. So the situation is not that easy. But we have to keep positively to see all the perspective. Yeah, it is not easy, but if we have similar perspective, confident with this effort, I'm sure we can go with these higher maps. Yeah, at least in the region. Yeah, thank you.
I believe there's a saying about together we go further, if you want to go far. I think, Gaurav, gonna have one person behind you and then.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for the wonderful report that you shared. I have a couple of questions. I'm Gaurav Mehtani from Daikin, India. So you mentioned about CSPF that, from China, certain CSPF, I think +6 is there as MEPS, but it was exported to other countries like Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, etc. So in the CSPF criteria, have you ever, mentioned about the climate zone and the temperature bin? Why I'm saying this, because if that would have been captured, we could have seen a different scenario on the CSPF. It might be possible that these countries do not fall in same climatic zone or follow same bin temperature. So it would have been nicer if you would have reflected somewhere so that, I don't know, maybe it could have been a contributor to the climate change from that point of view, or maybe not. So probably that can one of my inputs. And the second point, I think, which Sonal also highlighted and gentleman also mentioned, you've captured the life cycle cost analysis. Have you captured the market operating price of those ACs in these countries so that we can see that, for example, inefficient ACs are there, but what is the market operating price difference between probably, I don't know what MEPs they are following, but probably a mid-level, say 3-star, and an inefficient ACs. If could have been, say, $5-10, then what are the barriers for the consumers not to reach out to those levels? I think maybe, I would be interested if this can be captured. Point number 3, before you answer, that I want to highlight is, you mentioned China did some 155 million ACs they produce, but that was the data in 2021. I'm sure even in 2022, you will see those figures down. And what countries are there now who are exporting to these countries? I'm sure there would be some, because after COVID, there was a big impact. And my last question is, you mentioned that R22, you want to take some time to answer? Can I hold? Okay. So, yeah. And you mentioned that R22 is going down in your report. From 21 to 23, you rightly mentioned that R32 is becoming popular in these countries. So the ratio would increase in those countries. So can you also throw some light on what are the prelim trends, if you could highlight from 21 to, say, fiscal year 23? Till March 23, I believe. And my last question is the refrigerant in those, say, China, they are exporting to these countries. Were these ACs filled with refrigerant or no? Sorry for asking too many questions, but yeah, thank you.
All right, so I think the CSPF question is an interesting one to use essentially the operating bin hours and what that would do if you were to convert the CSPS from China to the local climate. That's an interesting question. I think should be doable.
Yeah, that is an interesting question. Not something that we had considered, so thank you for bringing that up. I don't think, given some of the inefficiencies that we've seen, I don't think it would be a vastly different picture. just having done some of those bin calculations with Southeast Asia countries previously. But that's a really interesting point, and I am going to pursue that calculation. And I think that would definitely add some context to our report. So thank you for bringing that up.
And I think the second question was on essentially the market operating price, and the idea essentially of the price differential between, say, a median efficiency and the MEPS efficiency, and essentially what the payback period might be on the difference between the two. Is that essentially what you're asking?
What I meant was, see, inefficient ACs are sold in these countries, and there would be a medium efficiency, say 2-star, 3-star. So if we would have captured or seen the difference in the price, if it could have been, say, $5, $10, I don't think that's a big barrier. It can be done quickly, as per our Daikin experience, what we've done in India. So that was essentially my question.
Do you have? I think that's an interesting point, because I think that those small differentials, and I think Kofi made a really good point early on, and one of the reasons I think, Carlin, the idea that we want to be pushing to higher efficiency is because the cost of inefficiency is actually cost borne by everyone, as the government has to invest in additional capacity, transmission, and the environmental impacts of that. So the idea of being able to overcome those small differentials makes a lot of sense. So I don't know if you have data to look at. I also recognize the time. So let's answer these, and I think, thank you for bearing with us. You all get gold stars.
I don't have data on that second question, but relating to the third question, so you were asking about the R32 increase over the 2021-2023 period. I pulled up some data. So it was pretty hard, I will say, to do the research and find quality data on the refrigerant transition annually. So there definitely was some extrapolation between years of data points. We mainly sourced from industry reports, even scientific publications. It was some of the data came from some of the purchased market data that we got from BISRIA. So we kind of, not ideally, pieced together some of those different data sets over time. And so with that kind of asterisk on it, for Indonesia, for instance, BAU in scenario, 2021 to 2023, it was about 65%, 75% R32. It's a pretty similar trend. Malaysia, 73, 75, 78. Philippines, 70, 79, 88. That was a pretty swift transition, actually, from what we saw. Singapore, 10, 24, 46. Again, a very swift transition because of Singapore actually implemented a ban on GWPs over 750. So it was a very, very swift transition. And then Thailand, 32, 40, 46, lagging behind, but nonetheless a pretty swift transition. Vietnam, 73, 79, 81. So the takeaway is across the region, there definitely was a large presence of R32 in the early 2020s, and also pretty steadily increasing as well for each country.
And I think in terms of whether the refrigerant, these are pre-charged units, do you know? I imagine dry shipping is not super common.
That is an interesting question. I didn't do the specific research on that. I think my colleague, my co-author would be better posed to answer that question. From what I understand, I think most of them were charged. I don't think a lot of countries would import them without the refrigerant in them. I could be wrong, but that was my understanding of her research. But that's really interesting. If you want to give me your contact information, I could also follow up more specifically with some of these questions, because we do have the data, or we'll run the calculations, because there are some good suggestions.
Yes, my question can be even later, because on time I will going to ask some question from me.
Someone who has to ask the question first, Howard. Is that okay? There's one more question behind you, since you've already spoken.
Okay, so.
I had a question that kind of built off of what you were talking about with the transition to 32. Did you see any energy efficiency improvements when there was the refrigerant transition as well? Were those kind of aligned, or were there still inefficient equipment that had moved to a new refrigerant?
Great question. What we tend to see is that there is an efficiency improvement in markets when there is a lower GWP refrigerant introduced. We did not specifically look at year-over-year efficiency data. We just gathered it for 2021, and then we took some extra time to look at the refrigerant transition as it related to the Montreal Protocol. Fantastic question. We simply don't have the data to answer. My guess, though, CLASP, does a lot of work with MEPS and efficiency, and the trend that we do see is there is a gradual increase. In our MEPSI model, we tend to assume generally that there's a 2% efficiency annual increase without refrigerant transition. So my guess is that it would be anywhere from maybe 3 even to 5. It would be a little bit accelerated from normal with a refrigerant transition. I don't have data to back that up though, so just take that with a grain of salt.
No, it's okay. I will have a question from Indonesia because I want to know more about the refrigeration sector in Indonesia. Is a cold chain working in your country?
I think it will be the same for the emerging countries. We don't have any cold chains this grand design yet in Indonesia, also the data for the cold chains. I'm involved in the National Cooling Action Plan, and when we have to analyze the data for cold chains, we have to analyze from the product. Yeah, so how many fish a year annually, how many meat, how many agriculture product, and we will compare with the population. Based on that data, Indonesia now only only have 15% of the cold storage that we need for the population. But it is if we see that the cold chains needed for the population like in a developed country, but it is the real situation is not like that, because in Indonesia, that we have a lot of agriculture, a lot of vegetables everywhere. So everybody doesn't really need the cold storage to get the fresh vegetables, to get the fresh meat and fresh chicken. Yeah. So at this moment, the people doesn't really feel that they need freezer. They only have refrigerator in their house, but we don't have experience to put our stock for weeks, for months. We can easily buy daily for food. Yeah. So the situation is cannot compare with other country maybe, but of course we don't have really clear program for the cold chains, even food cold chains, also for vaccine cold chains. Yeah, I think it is similar in all the A5 country. Yeah, that's maybe. I hope I answer your question. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And I can just briefly add, I've been working with the Pakistan stakeholders that CLASP works with. We've been developing the Pakistan Cooling Action Plan. Part of that, we were hoping to look into cold chain. We didn't have the time nor resources to do that because it was a pretty extensive research endeavor. But we do know that there definitely is a need for cold chain throughout Pakistan. So I think it is a bit of a different situation, but I'm glad that we kind of got the perspective from Indonesia specifically. So we didn't do any of the research on that, but we know that it's definitely a need in Pakistan, and it's a pretty, it's not well met from what we understand currently.
Thank you so much. A great job. We need to raise the awareness on refrigeration sector, and as you said, 5% of population can afford for refrigeration. If we pass from 5% to 95%, the matter will change, because refrigeration sector, in this case, talking about cold chain, it will be more important. Of course, where temperature is between 25 and 27. This is also the reason why Indonesia is quite different. For example, you can say in Pakistan or in Afghanistan, other country, or A5 country, but in African country we have a hot climate, so we need more a cold chain to make it sustainable. So I would like to give you some hack for your government to say it's better to to push refrigeration sector. But if you already say that we don't need a cold chain because we already have fresh food every day, so it cannot be an argument anymore to say you need to push, because the maps we need everywhere, the maps. But to make it work also, we have to make large use of the equipment, and then to have large market of product, of course, more requests, then the price will be better. And of course, I think the manufacturer also will change and to give us a good and quality product, not the cheaper one, and dump it the product we probably not supposed to manufacture. Thank you so much for your great job. I appreciate it a lot, and I look ahead with you to continue some research in African market, probably about the taxes I'm talking about, because we can find a solution while making this kind of showing, highlighting on this kind of issues. This is a great job. Congratulations to you and to your company who take time to make such a research, last time for Africa and now for Asia. I think really is a great job. Appreciate it a lot. Thank you again.
Thank you very much to the good questions and for your being attentive, especially late on a Thursday. I do want to say that we're expecting the publication of the report to come out in August?
Yeah.
August. So look for that. I think CLASP is usually good about putting out releases. So we should probably try to get emails, but look CLASP website, there'll be information.
Yeah, even if we don't get emails, if you're interested in August, just Google CLASP dumping Southeast Asia. It'll come right up, hopefully, on Google. And yeah, we'll have much more thorough discussion in the report, so much more of the data assumptions fleshed out, and also a lot of narrative contextualizing some of the figures that I did quickly go over in this presentation.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.